The Galactic Council Chamber was a place of order, light, and precise movements. Delegates from countless worlds, each with skin, scales, feathers, or entirely unfamiliar shapes, moved carefully along polished floors. Conversations buzzed quietly in languages that echoed with strange rhythms. Normally, this hall was calm, a center for discussion, negotiation, and debate. Today, however, something was different. A tremor ran through the room even before the first alert sounded. No one expected the arrival of humans. Humanity had been absent from galactic affairs for months, and most species assumed they were busy with their own problems on their distant blue planet. The humans had not sent messengers, diplomats, or even a simple signal. And yet, without warning, enormous vessels appeared in the central docking sphere, massive and dark, against the light of the Council's orbiting station. Their sudden presence froze everyone in place. The vessels themselves were strange to look at, shapes no one had fully understood before, yet undeniably human. What drew every gaze, however, was the sight that made stomachs tighten. The hulls were streaked with deep red, dried into patterns that suggested chaos and struggle. Some assumed it was blood. Many immediately assumed the worst. Security alarms went off, but the sound was almost drowned by a rising wave of whispers. The council members turned to each other, scales rustling, eyes widening, mandibles clacking, tails flicking nervously. "They come from battle," one delegate hissed in a low tone, glancing at another. "They must have attacked someone or been attacked." Others murmured, trying to make sense of what they saw. Some species had heard tales of humans' unpredictability, their stubbornness, and their occasional brutality. But even those who knew them best were caught off guard by the sight of these vessels. Scarred and ominous, thought the chamber commander. A being with translucent skin and eyes that rotated independently tapped a console to track the vessels. "Identification confirmed," it said, voice calm but tight. "Human fleet. No transmission. Approaching Docking Bay 5. The words did little to soothe the council. Docking Bay 5 had never handled a fleet of this size, nor one arriving under such suspicious circumstances. The human ships were enormous, each one shaped with sharp, functional lines rather than aesthetic elegance. They were vessels of purpose, built for survival, endurance, and something else the council could not yet name. The delegates argued in hushed tones, each trying to anticipate human intentions. Some called for immediate quarantine measures. Others demanded that the humans be stopped before they even docked. A few, more daring, suggested sending welcoming parties, though no one volunteered to be first. Fear mingled with curiosity, a dangerous combination in such a place. The humans, after all, had a history of acts that bordered on the impossible. They had survived places others could not, defied odds that should have ended them, and still maintained a strange, quiet pride that unnerved even the most experienced council members. The first human ships glided into view of the docking bay windows, and a collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The red streaks glinted in the light of the station's sun, looking for all the world like blood dried on the hulls. Some species shrank back in their seats. A few covered their eyes. Cameras and sensors focused on the vessels, attempting to detect signs of weapon activity, though none were found. Nothing moved except the human ships themselves, yet every being present felt a tension that went beyond the physical. Inside the vessels, humans were silent. They had not made contact, had not fired weapons, had not signaled in any way. Their ships had not emitted distress calls, warnings, or even the low hum of communication. It was as though they had appeared from another dimension, and the council members were left to interpret what they saw. Whispers spread quickly. "They come from battle. They must be injured, or worse, they bring death with them." The words bounced from one species to another, and soon the entire chamber was alive with speculation. Fear and unease As the docking process began, a few brave council members pressed controls to attempt communication. "Humans, identify yourselves," one broadcast said, calm and professional. "State your purpose." The response, however, was silence. Only the vessels moved, gliding toward the docking ports, their blood-stained hulls now close enough for the details to be seen. Bits of debris were caught in some of the grooves, and strange stains ran along the edges of the metal like marks left by struggle. No one could imagine what humans had faced to come back in such a state. Some delegates began to recall humanity's past actions in the galaxy. Humans were unpredictable. They could be patient, clever, and cooperative when needed, but they also had a streak of stubbornness and danger that often surprised others. Stories had spread across the council of human crews, entering deadly territories and returning unscathed, against all logic. Perhaps that same courage or recklessness was behind this sudden, mysterious appearance. But that was cold comfort for the beings who now watched the vessels approach. The silence inside the chamber was heavy, only broken by the soft clank of consoles and the occasional low murmur. Every eye was fixed on the ships as they docked. When the massive doors opened, letting light flood the bay, the human crews could finally be seen moving across the deck. Their suits were scratched and worn. Their posture was tired, but upright. There were no weapons raised, no signs of aggression. And yet the council could not shake the feeling that these humans carried stories of hardship, struggle, and survival. Every stain and mark on their vessels and armor was a question they longed to ask, but dared not. The first human steps onto the docking platform were careful. They did not rush. They did not shout. They did not gesture wildly. Each human moved as if carrying the weight of everything they had faced to get here. The council members leaned forward, their curiosity now stronger than their fear, but hesitation still held them back. After all, the humans had arrived without warning. They had blood-stained vessels, and no one knew why. Outside the docking bay, the expanse of space stretched endlessly, stars flickering in the distance. It was a peaceful view, yet the humans' presence made it almost tense. Every species present sensed something they could not name. Was this vengeance? A plea? A warning? Or something else entirely? The humans themselves offered no clues. They simply moved forward, silent, determined, and unyielding. In that moment, the Galactic Council understood something important, even if they did not yet know what it was. Humans did not arrive for spectacle or diplomacy alone. They arrived because they had to, because circumstances had forced them into this path. And whatever had happened to them to leave their vessels marked with red, it had been extraordinary. Perhaps tragic. Perhaps heroic. But it had been human. The chamber remained tense, waiting. Every delegate held their breath, watching, guessing, fearing, and hoping. The humans paused just before the main entrance, and for the first time, the council members could see their faces, smeared with grime, exhaustion, and determination. No one spoke, no one moved. The human silence was louder than any warning. It spoke of endurance, of a story that had not yet been told, of trials faced far beyond the council's imagination. And in that silence, the council began to realize that this day would be remembered, not for ceremony, debate, or diplomacy, but for the arrival of humans silent, blood-stained, and unbroken. The first part of the story had begun, and every being present understood that the truth behind these vessels would change their view of humanity forever. The council chamber remained tense after the humans' arrival. The red-stained vessels had docked, and the humans had stepped onto the platform, yet no one had approached them. Delegates exchanged nervous glances, uncertain whether to welcome them or prepare for confrontation. The fear in the room was almost tangible. Some species, those with long memories of human history, whispered about past incidents where humans had appeared unexpectedly and accomplished feats that no other race could imagine. But this time, the signs were different. These humans looked worn, battered, and somehow heavier than any ordinary traveler. It was a look that spoke of survival against impossible odds. The council began debating what to do. Some members suggested sending a welcoming party immediately. "They may need assistance," one said, her voice quivering slightly. Her skin shimmered in soft patterns, reflecting her nervous energy. Another delegate, covered in thick scales, shook his head. "We cannot risk it. We do not know what they have been through. Their vessels are stained. It could be a warning. It could be a trap." The room buzzed with quiet arguments. Every suggestion seemed dangerous. Every hesitation seemed risky. While the council argued, the humans remained where they were, standing silently in the docking bay. They did not panic, did not shout, and did not rush. Their bodies were tired, armor scratched, faces streaked with dust and grime. Observers could see exhaustion in their posture, but there was also a calm determination, a kind of quiet confidence that made it clear they had been through something extraordinary. Every species in the room noticed this, even if they did not fully understand it. Humans carried themselves differently. They had a presence that demanded attention without needing to speak. The debate continued, growing more intense. Some council members argued that the humans should be treated as potential threats until proven otherwise. "We cannot allow them to enter without inspection," one said. "We do not know what they carry, what they might do. Their vessels are covered in blood-like stains. That is a warning. That is not normal." Others disagreed, pointing out that humans had no history of attacking council members directly. "Perhaps they are coming from a dangerous situation," one delegate suggested. "Perhaps they need help." The discussion went back and forth, each argument rising in intensity, each voice laced with anxiety. Finally, a vote was called. The council chamber, usually a place of calm diplomacy, was filled with a tense silence as representatives considered what to do. Would they take the cautious path and isolate the humans, risking offense or misunderstanding? Or would they take the brave path and welcome them, risking danger but showing goodwill? Every species felt the weight of the decision. Humans had been absent for months, and their sudden, mysterious return had thrown the galaxy into uncertainty. The chamber was no longer just a place for discussion. It had become a stage for a moment that would be remembered for centuries. The vote was split. Some delegates leaned toward quarantine, believing it was the safest option. Others argued for a controlled welcome, reasoning that understanding humans was always better than fearing them. In the end, it was decided to allow a small delegation to approach the humans cautiously, while keeping security teams on standby. It was a compromise, one that reflected the council's desire for both caution and curiosity. Outside the chamber, the humans had begun moving closer to the entrance. Their steps were steady, slow, and purposeful. Observers could see the fatigue in their movements, but also the resilience. These were beings who had endured something unimaginable, and yet they carried themselves with dignity. The council representatives watched carefully, noting every detail. Some were struck by the humans' endurance. Others were unsettled by the quiet confidence they displayed, as if they had already faced death and survived. The first human to reach the platform paused, looking around at the gathered council members. There was no fear in his expression. There was no anger, no aggression. There was only a steady awareness, a readiness to confront whatever came next. The other humans behind him mirrored the same posture, moving in unison, silent, yet commanding attention. Some council members leaned forward, unable to look away. Others felt a creeping sense of unease. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but they were also capable of acts of bravery and sacrifice that no one else could match. Inside the chamber, conversations quieted as the humans entered. The council watched, tense and alert. Every delegate wanted to understand why humans had come, what they had experienced, and why their vessels were covered in red. Questions buzzed in every mind. Had they been in battle? Had they suffered loss? Or had they committed violence themselves? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. Humans had a reputation for defying expectations, and no one present could be sure what the truth would reveal. The humans moved toward the center of the chamber, their steps measured. Delegates noticed the subtle signs of strain: small scratches on armor, marks on gloves, a faint tremor in posture. These were not signs of aggression. These were signs of survival. Every species present began to sense that something extraordinary had occurred, something beyond their understanding. The human silence was not empty. It was full of unspoken stories, of trials endured and dangers faced, of courage that went unseen and sacrifices that went unrecorded. Some council members began whispering among themselves. Do you see how they carry themselves? They have faced something impossible. Perhaps they saved others, even at great risk to themselves. Or perhaps they fought something we cannot even imagine. The speculation grew, filling the chamber with a mix of awe and anxiety. The humans themselves gave no indication, no hint, no explanation. They simply moved forward, silent witnesses to their own deeds. Finally, the humans reached the central platform. They stopped and looked directly at the council members. There was a moment of silence, stretching longer than anyone thought possible. Every eye in the chamber was on them. Every delegate felt the weight of the moment. Humans had arrived without warning, without explanation, and yet there was a presence about them that demanded recognition. It was a quiet authority, one that did not need words or weapons to assert itself. Then one of the humans stepped forward slightly, gesturing toward a sealed case he carried. The council members noticed it immediately. The case was small but heavy, clearly containing something important. Questions rose in the chamber. Was it evidence? A weapon? A message? The humans gave nothing away. They simply waited, as if inviting the council to speak first, to ask, to listen. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Every species wondered what had brought these humans to their chamber in such a state. Every being wanted answers. Every delegate feared the truth could be more incredible than they were prepared to handle. Security teams remained close, weapons at the ready, but no one moved. The humans had not made a hostile move. They had not threatened anyone. Yet the council could not shake the sense that something monumental had occurred. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation. Even those who had doubted humans' courage now felt a spark of something extraordinary. There was bravery in their stance, endurance in their eyes, and a silent demand for recognition in the way they stood. Humans had arrived not as conquerors, not as diplomats, but as survivors, and that fact alone filled the chamber with awe. Whispers continued among council members, quieter now, more thoughtful. They are tired, but still standing. They have endured something beyond imagination. Perhaps we judged them too quickly. The atmosphere began to shift slightly, from fear and suspicion to something closer to respect. The humans' presence alone forced a change in perception. They were no longer merely mysterious visitors. They were beings who had faced the unknown and lived. Beings whose story demanded attention before any assumptions could be made. As the minutes passed, the humans remained still, allowing the council to process their presence. There was no hurry, no panic, just quiet strength. Slowly, the delegates began to realize that the humans' arrival was not random. It was deliberate. They had come here for a reason, and that reason would reveal itself in time. The question of what they had faced and why their vessels were covered in red became the central concern of the chamber. Every mind was fixed on the humans, waiting for the story to begin. The council understood that this day would mark a turning point. Humans had returned after months of absence, their vessels marked by unknown events, and their presence demanded attention. The questions remained unanswered, the mysteries unresolved, but the stage was set. Every species present sensed that what they were about to witness could change their understanding of humans forever. And so, with every eye fixed on them, the humans waited, silent, determined, and unbroken, as the Galactic Council prepared to confront what they had always suspected but never fully understood. The day had begun, and the story of humanity's courage and endurance was about to unfold. The humans remained on the platform, silent yet unmistakably present. Their movements were calm, measured, but every step carried a sense of weariness. The Council could no longer mistake them for ordinary travelers. There was a story written on their faces and their bodies, a story of survival, of struggle, and of something extraordinary that no one had yet begun to understand. For the first time since the humans had arrived, a delegate spoke, her voice careful, almost trembling. "Humans, what has happened to you? What has brought you here like this?" The human in front of the group looked at her slowly. His eyes, sharp and steady despite fatigue, swept across the chamber, observing every face, every reaction. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture wildly. He simply nodded once, acknowledging the question. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm, carrying the weight of someone who had faced unimaginable challenges. "We come not to threaten, not to fight, but to show what has been done and what has been endured. Our vessels are not stained with the blood of our enemies. They are marked with the evidence of survival, of effort, and of sacrifice." A murmur ran through the chamber. Delegates leaned forward, trying to catch every word. Some blinked, unsure if they had heard correctly. "Sacrifice?" One of them whispered. "What do they mean?" The human continued, explaining that their journey had taken them far beyond the familiar paths of the galaxy. They had followed reports of a disaster, one that most species had ignored or avoided. Entire fleets had vanished, planets had sent distress signals that went unanswered, and thousands of lives had been at risk. Humanity, hearing these cries for help, had chosen to act. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Many species had avoided these zones, calling them too dangerous, too unpredictable, or too costly to reach. Yet humans had entered without hesitation. They had risked everything to reach those in need. Their vessels, streaked with red, were not proof of violence committed by humans, but evidence of the dangerous environments they had faced. They had traversed collapsing debris fields, hazardous zones, and areas filled with toxic biological matter to rescue the innocent. Every stain, every mark, told a story of life saved rather than life taken. A delegate with feathers that shimmered in the chamber's light whispered to a companion. They entered the zones that no one else would touch. And they survived. Another, covered in tough, armored skin, muttered, "They risked everything." Entire crews were lost, yet they came here to report it, not to claim victory. The humans' calm words and measured explanation slowly began to change the atmosphere in the room. Fear and suspicion were being replaced by awe, admiration, and in some cases, guilt. The human leader opened the sealed case he carried. Inside were records, holographic images, biological samples, and recordings of the disaster zones they had traversed. The council members could see it: wrecked vessels, collapsed structures, and creatures caught in chaotic storms of organic matter that no other species had dared approach. The images were disturbing, yet they spoke of extraordinary bravery. Humans had pulled survivors from collapsing ships, carried them to safety, and endured exposure to hazards that would have killed most other species instantly. The chamber grew quiet as delegates absorbed the scale of the effort. Some council members began to realize how little they truly understood humanity. Stories had been told, myths had been shared, but now the truth was visible. Humans did not act out of pride or ambition alone. They acted out of necessity, empathy, and a determination to do what was right, even when the cost was high. The blood-stained vessels were no longer a warning. They were a symbol, a record of courage, endurance, and sacrifice. Delegates began to ask questions, slowly and carefully, wanting to understand more. "How did you survive the biological storms?" one asked. The human explained that their crews had worked in perfect coordination, using protective suits, specialized tools, and careful strategy to navigate the hazardous zones. Every movement was calculated, every decision made with the lives of others in mind. There was no recklessness, only courage guided by intelligence and care. Another delegate asked about the thousands of lives reported saved. The human described the evacuation efforts, the rescue of creatures from failing ships, and the challenges of navigating dangerous currents of collapsing debris. Every story carried a quiet weight, the kind that made listeners feel both relief and respect. These were lives saved not for fame, not for reward, but because humanity could not ignore the suffering of others. No matter the danger, the council began to see the scale of what had occurred. Humans had risked everything where others hesitated. They had faced impossible odds, survived disasters that would have destroyed most fleets, and emerged carrying survivors to safety. The red streaks on their vessels were evidence of contact with the biological hazards, marks left by the very matter they had braved to save others. The chamber, once filled with suspicion, was now filled with quiet astonishment. Some delegates felt a pang of guilt. They had debated sending rescue efforts, but ultimately chose caution. Others had considered their own fleets too weak or too unprepared for the hazards. And now, standing before them, were humans who had done what they could not. The realization hit slowly, a reminder of what courage and determination could achieve. The human leader continued, showing more evidence, explaining how teams had worked together to ensure that no life was left behind when possible. He described moments of despair when entire ships were about to collapse and humans had risked their own safety to save others. The chamber could almost feel the tension of those moments, imagining the fear, the adrenaline, and the determination that had driven humanity through impossible situations. Delegates began to murmur among themselves, discussing quietly, but with growing respect. The human's explanation was precise, clear, and humble. They did not boast. They did not claim to be heroes. They simply told what had happened, letting the evidence speak for itself. And the evidence was undeniable. Humans had faced danger on a scale unimaginable to most species, and they had acted with courage and care at every step. Slowly, the chamber's atmosphere shifted. Fear and suspicion melted into respect and understanding. The council members now saw humanity in a new light, not as unpredictable or reckless, but as beings of extraordinary resilience and moral determination. The humans' arrival, once feared as a potential threat, was now recognized as an act of bravery, a record of what could be accomplished when courage met necessity. The human leader closed the case and looked around the chamber. His expression was steady, calm, and yet deeply human in its weight. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply acknowledged the room, as if to say, "We have done what we could, and now you know." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with understanding, reflection, and a new kind of respect. Every species present sensed that this moment would be remembered for generations. Delegates whispered to one another, recounting what they had seen, trying to process the bravery and sacrifice displayed. Some were visibly moved. Others simply stared, unable to put their thoughts into words. The humans had arrived with blood-stained vessels, yes, but the truth was far greater than anyone had imagined. These were not vessels of destruction. They were vessels of courage, endurance, and hope. The council began to realize the scale of humanity's achievement. In a galaxy often ruled by politics, fear, and self-interest, humans had acted from empathy and moral courage. They had taken risks others would not, faced dangers unimaginable, and saved countless lives without expecting reward. The chamber, once tense and suspicious, was now filled with a quiet reverence. Humans had arrived not to demand respect. They had earned it through actions that could not be ignored. And in that moment, every delegate understood something profound. Humans were not merely another species in the galaxy. They were beings capable of extraordinary acts, driven by determination, courage, and a sense of responsibility that few could match. The blood-stained vessels were no longer a symbol of fear. They were a testament to what humans could endure, survive, and achieve. The council waited, silent, as the humans stood before them, unyielding yet humble, exhausted yet resolute. This was only the beginning of their story. The events that had brought them here would unfold further, but the first truth was clear. Humanity had acted when others hesitated, and the galaxy could not forget what they had done. The stage was set for recognition, understanding, and perhaps for a new way of seeing humans forever. The council chamber remained quiet after the humans had revealed their story. The room had shifted from suspicion to awe, but the story was not fully understood yet. Every delegate was trying to absorb what had happened. The humans had survived hazards that no one else dared to face, rescued thousands, and returned with vessels streaked in red as proof of the trials they had endured. Yet, the full impact of what they had done was only beginning to settle in. Some of the delegates began whispering to one another, their voices tinged with disbelief and admiration. They went into the zones that even our fleets avoid, one said, her voice trembling slightly. They pulled survivors out while everything around them collapsed. And they survived. Another delegate, with a thick armored body, nodded. We underestimated them. We thought humans were reckless, unpredictable. But this is bravery on a scale I cannot fully comprehend. The atmosphere in the chamber began to change. Where there had been fear and tension, there was now respect and a quiet admiration that filled the room. The humans had moved to the center of the platform, silent but calm. Their expressions showed exhaustion, but their posture remained strong. They did not speak immediately. Instead, they allowed the council members to process what they had seen. This pause gave the delegates time to look closer, to notice the small details that spoke volumes: scratches on armor from debris, faint stains on their gloves, subtle signs of fatigue in their movements. Every mark told a story of courage and endurance. Then the human leader spoke again, explaining the complexity of the missions they had undertaken. The zones were unpredictable. Ships were collapsing. Biological storms moved faster than sensors could track. We could not save everyone, but we saved as many as we could. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Some crews did not make it. Some vessels were lost. But we could not abandon those who still had a chance. His voice was steady, but there was a quiet gravity that filled the chamber. The council members could feel it. They could imagine the fear, the tension, and the determination that must have filled the human crews during these operations. Delegates leaned forward, absorbing the information. The chamber was filled with a mixture of silence, whispered comments, and occasional gasps. The humans' actions were extraordinary, and their courage undeniable. Many realized that they had misjudged humans. They had assumed recklessness, unpredictability, or even aggression. But what the humans had done was something else entirely. It was selfless, it was calculated, and it was courageous in a way that few species could truly understand. Some council members began to feel guilt. They had debated sending rescue fleets, but ultimately chose safety over action. Others had considered the dangers too great for their own crews. And now, humanity had done what others had feared to attempt. They had risked everything, faced almost certain death, and emerged with survivors in tow. The realization was humbling. Humans had acted not for glory, not for reward, but because they could not turn away from those in danger. The human leader opened the sealed case again, showing more evidence. There were recordings of collapsing ships, images of survivors being pulled to safety, and sensors that documented the dangerous environments they had navigated. The council members could see debris fields collapsing, biological storms shifting unpredictably, and vessels caught in situations no other fleet had dared to enter. Every image, every recording, reinforced the truth of what humanity had accomplished. It was not just survival. It was heroism in its purest form. Delegates began asking questions, wanting to understand more. How did you coordinate so effectively in such dangerous conditions? One asked. The human explained that they had trained for situations like this, for environments that no one else expected to survive. They had worked as a team, relied on each other, and trusted their skills and judgment. Every move had been deliberate, every decision made to maximize survival and rescue as many lives as possible. Their success was not luck. It was strategy, skill, and courage combined. Another delegate asked about the biological storms. The human described them as unpredictable, fast-moving, and deadly. Sensors could not fully track them. Crews had to rely on experience, quick thinking, and split-second decisions to navigate safely. Every rescue had been a gamble, every action a test of endurance and willpower. The council could almost feel the intensity of the operations, the pressure the humans had faced, and the stakes involved. As the explanations continued, the chamber's mood shifted further. Suspicion and fear were replaced by admiration, amazement, and a growing recognition of human courage. Delegates whispered among themselves, sharing thoughts and reflections. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded quietly, acknowledging the bravery that had been demonstrated. Humans had acted where others hesitated. They had faced danger when others avoided it, and they had saved lives that might otherwise have been lost. The council began to realize the implications of humanity's actions. This was not just a single mission or an isolated event. It was a demonstration of human resilience, determination, and moral courage. It was proof that humans could act decisively and selflessly, even in situations that seemed impossible. Their arrival, once feared, now represented hope and inspiration. Every delegate present understood that humanity's actions would change perceptions across the galaxy. Some delegates began to speak more openly, acknowledging the humans' achievements. "We have underestimated them," one said. "We thought humans were unpredictable, perhaps reckless. But this is something else entirely." Another added, "They acted when we would not. They faced danger when we avoided it. And they saved lives." The mood in the chamber had shifted completely. Humans were no longer seen as a potential threat. They were seen as a force for courage, resilience, and hope. The human leader closed the case, allowing the council members a moment to reflect. His gaze swept across the chamber, calm but filled with quiet authority. There was no arrogance, no boastful tone. The humans had not come to demand recognition. They had come to show what had been done, to present the truth of their actions. And in doing so, they had earned the respect of every being present. Delegates began to discuss among themselves, weighing what they had learned. Some spoke of pride, others of humility, and many simply remained silent, processing the enormity of what had occurred. The human story had challenged assumptions, reshaped perceptions, and demonstrated that courage and moral determination could surpass even the most advanced technology or strategies. The humans stood silently, allowing the council members to absorb the magnitude of their achievements. There was exhaustion in their posture, but also a quiet strength, a resilience that commanded attention without demanding it. Every delegate understood that these humans had faced trials that few species could imagine, and they had emerged not only alive, but victorious in their mission to save others. Finally, a delegate broke the silence, speaking for many in the room. Humanity has shown us something we have rarely seen in this galaxy: courage, resilience, and moral determination. They risked everything to save others, and they have returned to show us the truth of their actions. The words were echoed in murmurs across the chamber. Humans had not merely survived, they had acted as examples of what beings could do when they refused to turn away from danger and suffering. The atmosphere in the chamber was transformed. Where there had been fear, suspicion, and tension, there was now admiration, respect, and a deep sense of understanding. Humanity's actions had reminded every species present that courage and moral responsibility were more powerful than any weapon or fleet. The Council understood that they were witnessing a turning point in galactic perception of humans. The humans remained where they were, calm, silent, and steady. They had done what they could. They had told their story and shown the evidence. Now it was up to the Council to process, understand, and respond. And in that moment, it was clear that the humans' courage had already changed the hearts and minds of those present. The blood-stained vessels, once a source of fear and suspicion, were now symbols of bravery, selflessness, and hope. As the chamber began to stir, conversations continued, this time not in whispers of fear, but in words of respect and admiration. Humans had arrived, and in doing so, they had reminded the galaxy that courage, determination, and moral action could shine even in the darkest of circumstances. Every delegate understood that this day would be remembered, not for conflict or debate, but for the extraordinary bravery that humanity had displayed. The chamber was filled with a heavy silence as the humans stood in the center, quiet but unyielding. The council members had seen the evidence, heard the accounts, and felt the weight of the humans' journey. What had once seemed like a terrifying, blood-stained fleet was now understood as proof of courage and sacrifice. The initial fear had been replaced with awe, but awe alone could not capture the full gravity of what humanity had accomplished. Each delegate slowly realized that they had underestimated humans for far too long. Whispers began to spread, not of suspicion this time, but of shock and, in some cases, guilt. Some species had debated sending rescue fleets into the same disaster zones. They had hesitated, worried about the risks, concerned with politics, safety, or cost. And now they understood what had been possible. Humanity had acted where others would not, had risked everything to save lives, and returned to tell the story. The council members could feel their own hesitation and caution reflected back at them, and many could not hide the shame that came with it. I cannot believe they did it," one delegate murmured, feathers trembling in the chamber's light. "We thought it was impossible. We thought we would be the only ones cautious enough to avoid disaster. And yet they survived. And they saved so many." Another delegate, armored and imposing, nodded slowly. "We debated sending our fleets. We thought it was too dangerous. And now, seeing what they've done, I feel ashamed we did not act." The room filled with quiet conversations, each one layered with a mix of respect, regret, and disbelief. The humans, however, said nothing more than necessary. They did not mock or accuse. They did not boast about the lives they had saved or the dangers they had faced. They simply stood, allowing the council to process the scale of their actions. Every gesture, every detail, the way they carried themselves, the small marks of fatigue, the calm in their expressions, told a story that no words could fully capture. Delegates were forced to confront a truth that challenged their assumptions about bravery, morality, and responsibility. Some council members began to ask more direct questions. How many lives were saved? One asked. The human leader responded quietly but firmly. Thousands. Not all could be rescued. Not all survived. But every life we could reach, we saved. That was our mission. That was our responsibility. The words hung in the chamber, echoing softly in the minds of those listening. The magnitude of what had been achieved became clearer with every sentence. Other delegates, once skeptical or fearful, began to recognize the larger implications. If humans can act like this, one said, then what else are they capable of? What else have we underestimated? The question was not meant to intimidate. It was a reflection of genuine astonishment. Humans had demonstrated qualities that few other species had been able to fully comprehend: moral courage, selfless determination, and the ability to act decisively in the face of overwhelming danger. As the discussion continued, a few of the rescued beings were allowed to enter the chamber. Their arrival added another layer to the story. These survivors, exhausted and fragile yet alive, bore witness to humanity's deeds. Their expressions, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and lingering trauma, told the council everything words could not. They approached the humans slowly, touching their arms or hands, offering gestures of thanks that were both quiet and profound. The chamber filled with an almost tangible sense of life saved, of hope restored, and of courage recognized. The council members watched, many with wide eyes, as the survivors shared their experiences. They described being trapped on failing ships, facing storms and hazards that seemed impossible to survive. They recounted the moments when humans arrived, guiding them to safety, providing care, and never giving up despite the danger. Every story was a testament to humanity's endurance and determination, and the delegates could feel the weight of it all pressing on their understanding. Some council members spoke, their voices trembling. "We did not act," one admitted. "We feared the danger, and we turned away. And yet, humanity risked everything. They faced the storm. They saved lives we would have lost. And they returned to show us what true courage looks like." The room grew quieter, the words sinking in. The humans did not respond with pride or arrogance. They simply stood, acknowledging the council's understanding, allowing their actions to speak louder than words could. The council realized that humanity's approach was different from any other species. They did not seek reward or recognition. They acted out of a sense of duty, of moral responsibility, and of empathy. Their courage was not born of arrogance, but of necessity and care. This distinction changed the perception of humans forever in the minds of every delegate present. Fear was replaced with respect. Doubt was replaced with admiration. Suspicion was replaced with awe. The humans continued to provide evidence, showing more recordings, more data, more proof of what had been accomplished. The chamber absorbed every detail: the collapsing vessels, the hazardous environments, the survivors being lifted to safety. Every piece of evidence reinforced the story, leaving no room for disbelief. Humanity had faced unimaginable risks and had emerged not only alive, but triumphant in their mission to save others. Some delegates began discussing the broader implications. "If humans are capable of this," one said, "then they have the potential to lead, to influence, to inspire change across the galaxy." Another added, "We must reconsider our assumptions, our fears, and the limits we place on ourselves. Humanity has shown us a standard we can no longer ignore." The council chamber, once filled with tension and anxiety, now buzzed with conversations of respect and recognition. The humans, despite their exhaustion, maintained their calm and steady presence. They did not seek accolades or praise. They had acted because they believed it was the right thing to do, and their presence now reminded the council of the values that could guide the galaxy. Their courage was a living example, a reminder that even in the face of impossible odds, moral action and determination could make a difference. Delegates began to take steps toward formal recognition. Recommendations were made to commend humanity, to honor their bravery and their selflessness. The chamber discussed ways to record and share the story, ensuring that future generations would understand what had been accomplished. The humans did not intervene in these discussions. They simply allowed their actions to be acknowledged, letting the council determine the appropriate response. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted further as more delegates spoke openly. "We must learn from them," one said. "Not just their courage, but their principles. The way they act with care, determination, and responsibility sets a new standard." Another added, "Their deeds remind us that we can do more, that we must do more." When faced with danger and uncertainty, humanity's actions had not only saved lives, they had inspired reflection, learning, and the possibility of change. The council began to understand the full impact of the humans' arrival. They had not come to challenge, to fight, or to demand. They had come to show what could be done, to demonstrate that courage and moral responsibility could overcome fear, danger, and hesitation. Their story was not just about survival. It was about the potential of action guided by empathy, determination, and moral clarity. As the council processed the humans' deeds, the rescued beings moved quietly among the delegates, sharing brief words of gratitude, gestures of thanks, and expressions of relief. Every movement, every interaction reinforced the truth. Humanity had acted selflessly, bravely, and effectively. The chamber was filled with a sense of unity, recognition, and a newfound understanding of what courage truly meant. By the time the humans stepped back slightly, allowing the council to deliberate, the mood had shifted completely. The fear and tension that had greeted their arrival were gone. In their place was admiration, respect, and a recognition that humanity had set a new standard for courage and moral responsibility in the galaxy. The chamber understood that this moment would be remembered, not as a day of fear, but as a day of extraordinary human courage, endurance, and the power of moral action. Finally, the council rose collectively to formally acknowledge the humans. Words of commendation, respect, and gratitude were shared, and the humans received recognition, not for what they demanded, but for what they had accomplished through bravery, selflessness, and resilience. Their actions had changed perceptions, inspired reflection, and reminded every species that true courage was not measured by power or force, but by the willingness to act for the good of others, even in the face of great risk. The humans, exhausted but unbowed, accepted the recognition quietly. They had not come for accolades, yet they had earned the highest respect of the Galactic Council. Their story, their deeds, and the survivors they had saved would be remembered forever as a testament to human courage, endurance, and the power of moral action. The chamber, once tense and uncertain, now stood as a witness to the extraordinary impact of humans who chose to act when others would not. The chamber had changed completely from the moment the humans had arrived. Where there had once been tension, fear, and uncertainty, there was now respect, admiration, and quiet reflection. The council members moved through the space more deliberately, observing the humans with a newfound understanding. They had listened, they had seen the evidence, and they had witnessed the impact of humanity's courage. Yet even with recognition given, the full story of the humans, deeds still resonated deeply in the minds of everyone present. Delegates continued to speak quietly among themselves, sharing observations, reflecting on the humans' journey, and discussing how extraordinary their actions had been. Many admitted to themselves that they had underestimated humanity, not because humans were weak, but because they had not anticipated the depth of their resilience, determination, and moral courage. "We thought they were reckless, unpredictable," one delegate said softly. "But this is something beyond recklessness. This is bravery guided by purpose." Another nodded, saying, "They did not act for recognition. They did not act for power. They acted because it was right. And that makes all the difference." The humans remained where they were, standing silently yet firmly in the center of the chamber. Their bodies showed fatigue. Their movements carried the weight of the long journey, and the trials they had endured. Yet they radiated a quiet strength that commanded attention without demanding it. Their calm presence reminded the council that true courage often required endurance, patience, and the willingness to face danger without hesitation. Every delegate sensed that these humans had lived experiences that few could imagine and had carried the consequences with dignity and resilience. Then the human leader spoke, his voice calm but steady. "We did not come here seeking praise or acknowledgement. We came because it was necessary. We came because lives needed saving, because danger required action, and because we could not remain silent while others suffered. What you see on our vessels, what you see in our appearance, is not the result of triumph over enemies, but the cost of survival, the price of responsibility, and the proof that action matters." His words resonated deeply. The council members absorbed them slowly, understanding that the humans had acted not for glory or recognition, but for a moral imperative that few species had fully comprehended. Some delegates lowered their heads, reflecting on their own hesitations, their own doubts, and the opportunities they had missed. The humans' courage had created a mirror, forcing every species present to consider what they might do if faced with similar circumstances. A quiet murmur spread across the chamber as the council members began sharing their thoughts. "We have seen fear. We have seen hesitation. And now we have seen what courage looks like," one said softly. "Humanity has reminded us that moral action is not about power, influence, or politics. It is about willingness to act when it matters most." Another delegate added, "They risked everything. They faced dangers we would have avoided, and yet they survived and saved others. That is something we must remember." The survivors of the disasters moved gently among the council members, sharing brief words of gratitude, gestures of thanks, and quiet nods of acknowledgement. Their presence added an emotional weight to the chamber that was impossible to ignore. Delegates could see the direct impact of humanity's courage, the lives saved, the hope restored, and the sense of safety returned to those who had faced almost certain doom. Every movement, every interaction, reinforced the truth that humanity's actions had been extraordinary, and that their story was now woven into the history of the galaxy. The council began to discuss formal recognition for humanity. Some members suggested creating official commendations. Others proposed documenting the missions as a historical record, and a few spoke of establishing new protocols to honor acts of bravery and selflessness. Humans did not intervene in these discussions. They did not push for awards or accolades. They simply allowed their deeds to speak for themselves, understanding that recognition was not the goal. Their goal had always been to save lives, and now the galaxy bore witness to the outcome. The chamber's mood shifted further as the council members considered the larger implications of what they had witnessed. Humanity's actions were not just an isolated event. They were a statement about potential, about moral courage, and about the standards that could guide the galaxy in the future. Delegates began reflecting on their own responsibilities, realizing that hesitation, fear, and caution could sometimes prevent necessary action. The humans had shown that decisive moral action, even in the face of danger, could achieve results that few others could hope to match. Some council members spoke openly, their voices tinged with emotion. "We must learn from this," one said. "We must consider how we respond to danger, how we act when others are in need, and how courage and responsibility guide our choices." Another added, "Humanity has set a standard that cannot be ignored. They have demonstrated that moral courage is the most powerful force in the galaxy." Their words reflected a shift not only in perception of humans, but also in their understanding of responsibility, leadership, and ethical action. The humans, despite their exhaustion, stood firm. Their silence was as powerful as any words could be, reminding the council that actions often spoke louder than speeches or proclamations. Every delegate recognized that these humans had faced what few could survive, had acted when others hesitated, and had carried the consequences with grace, humility, and quiet strength. Their example had reshaped the understanding of courage, duty, and moral responsibility for everyone present. The chamber slowly filled with conversation, reflection, and discussion of the implications. Delegates acknowledged that humanity had changed the way the galaxy might view bravery and responsibility. They had acted without expecting recognition, yet their story demanded attention. They had faced disasters that many had deemed impossible to survive, and their return, blood-stained vessels and all, served as evidence that courage and determination could overcome even the most dangerous situations. The humans began to step back slightly, allowing the council to deliberate without their direct presence. This act itself carried meaning. It was a quiet signal that their work was complete for now, that the story had been told, and that the galaxy could reflect on its lessons. Their presence alone had transformed perceptions, inspired hope, and challenged assumptions. The delegates understood that the humans had not come for accolades. They had come to act, and their actions had spoken volumes. As the council members conferred, the survivors quietly returned to their positions, continuing to bear witness to humanity's deeds. Their presence reinforced the reality of what had been accomplished. It was no longer an abstract story or distant rumor. It was a tangible demonstration of courage, endurance, and moral action. Delegates could feel the significance of the day settling into the history of the chamber, knowing that this would be remembered as a turning point in the understanding of human capabilities. Finally, a decision was made. The council would formally record the actions of humanity, not just as a historical event, but as a lesson in courage, resilience, and ethical responsibility. Decrees were drafted, commendations proposed, and plans made to ensure that future generations would know the story. Humans did not intervene or demand. They had acted selflessly, and now the galaxy would bear witness and remember their deeds. The humans stood silently as the council began the formal recognition. Delegates spoke of bravery, endurance, and moral clarity. They spoke of the lives saved, the risks faced, and the courage shown in the face of overwhelming danger. Every word reinforced the lessons the humans had demonstrated, that action mattered, that moral responsibility was paramount, and that true courage was measured not by force or aggression, but by willingness to act. When others could not dot by the time the recognition concluded, the chamber was filled with a sense of closure, understanding, and inspiration. Humanity's arrival, once feared and questioned, had transformed into a story of hope, courage, and moral triumph. Delegates left the platform with a renewed sense of what could be achieved when beings acted with empathy, determination, and responsibility. The humans, finally, allowed themselves a quiet moment to rest. Their mission had been long, perilous, and exhausting, yet they had completed it. They had survived, saved countless lives, and shown the galaxy the true meaning of courage. Their story would be remembered, their actions studied, and their example followed for generations. The chamber, once tense and suspicious, now stood as a testament to what humans could endure and accomplish. The day had begun with fear, suspicion, and uncertainty. It ended with understanding, recognition, and respect. Humanity had arrived at the Galactic Council with blood-stained vessels, but they left behind a legacy far greater than any physical mark could show. They left behind a story of courage, resilience, and moral action that would inspire the galaxy forever.